yeah, I'm to be with you. And I'll just introduce myself first. Yeah, at e shik e ado shidene e shi e nanish e trachi in a shlindon hasgaidene e bashishi ashi hede shiche bilagana e de chanele. Taos New Mexico date na sha Lyla June dashijine akut ego dene asts on in the shling. Um, so greetings, my kin and my people. I'm from the Black Charcoal Streak division of the Red Running into Water clan of the Dene Nation, um, also incorrectly known as Navajo. We're like the down south Dene. um, and My father's mother is of the Cheyenne clan. My mother's father is of the Salt clan of the Dene Nation, and then my father's father is of the European clans, as far as I know. Um, and I'm from Taos, New Mexico, and um, I, my name's Lyla June, and in that manner, I present myself as a Dene woman. Uh, so I'm really quite um, honored to be here with all of you. I feel like folks in Canada just are on this other level. As you can tell, we're struggling over here with our crazy situation politically and just all the ways. So it's just nice to connect with y'all. Um, you know, nice to connect with you when you're way up there and I'm way down here. You know, it's really nice to just weave those kinship ties again because I feel like this whole continent, even with South America, used to be so connected, and now these imaginary colonial borders have kind of disconnected us, and so it's nice to be with you all as relatives and dissolve these imaginary borders. But yeah, so I wanted to talk today about the way I view healing. Um, Healing to me, as it's probably been for anyone, really is a huge part of my life because that's how I got sober. That's how I got safe again. Um, that's how I started to love myself again instead of a lot of the self hate that I carried. Um, and just real quick again, CL, when does my time stop? Just so I can pace myself.
We have, I mean, if you go till 4, that's great, but I've told most people that it's about an hour that we'll have, including
Sure,
question and answer
that's
and
fine.
stuff.
Okay, great. Sounds good. And then I keep seeing people in the waiting room, so maybe you could keep an eye on that too. Um, but okay, cool. So um, yeah, so I'll just tell my story basically, and I think that will actually help because there's certain um, pivotal moments in my story where illumination happens and I understand things better, and then I can it's like little breakthroughs throughout my life. So I was born in New Mexico. I'm part native and part European, so you know there's that quandary I was born into where I'm like, and the word for European in my mom's language, which is a new word, it's very recent, is the ones we fight with, you know. So like when I introduce my clans, I'm literally saying I am the one I fight with. So that's a whole other story of trying to reconcile being mixed race and then finally coming to realize that it's actually a blessing, and that I'm not so much a mutt, but I'm more of like a hybrid, and that hybridity is a strength of its own. Um, and helps me bridge things sometimes too. Um, so to of drugs and alcohol. I I was high pretty much the moment I was born, because it was all around me, and the smoke would would uh, leach into my system, and so I didn't really know anything else. And when those chemicals are in your system, it makes it hard to feel right, because your your system is designed to feel most clearly when it's in the state of mind that creator gave us. um, so I was really in a situation where I didn't really understand how to process emotions, how to process trauma, because I wasn't even there to process it, and I'm still working on it. But as I grew older, and there was some child sexual abuse going on in the home to me and uh, those around me. And but what's interesting is I didn't really understand that it was that until I was like 23 years old. I'm 30 now, but I didn't even understand that what was happening wasn't normal. I just thought that's just normal. And I even found a way to turn it into love, to say, oh, well, these older people are doing this because we're just we're just not prude, and this kind of stuff doesn't bother us, and we're just so advanced and sophisticated and than other communities, so we're just kind of beyond. And as I grew older, when I was 11 years old, I started to do drugs myself, sort of like, directly. Um, and that was, marijuana. And I remember all the older kids in the school were doing it, and even my basketball coach, would like get us high and stuff. So, and then it moved to alcohol and harder drugs and harder drugs. And so I think I grew up in an environment where um, drugs were the normal way to escape feeling and issues. So if people were feeling that, I don't know if you've ever felt like this deep down pain that's just kind of dull, and it goes with you everywhere you go, and it usually comes from memories or traumatic events that you haven't had, or I never had the chance to process. Um, and so the way to get away from that dull feeling deep inside is um, just to get high, and that way you don't. So that process of running away instead of facing the emotions, facing the feelings, and having the courage to feel them, so that you can let them go and then forgive and then be free. That process of facing my feelings was never really modeled to me. So then growing up, like I said, as an adolescent, I started to do drugs, and that became my way of escaping. And of course, when you're at the parties, which I was at a lot of parties, uh, and and then I went to college at Stanford University, which was completely crazy, in terms of drugs and alcohol and parties and stuff. And so when you're at all these parties and you're a woman, and especially a brown woman, I would say, people, stuff happens, stuff happens that you wish didn't happen. Um, Either I would do something stupid that made me feel stupid and regretful, or people would do things to my body that I um, I had no control over. They would just kind of take advantage of me when I either was too young to understand, or too drunk to defend myself, or too nice to say no, or all. And so, this is a little bit of a heavy topic, but I'm not, just so you know, I'm not hurt by it anymore. So if, when I say it, it's not, I don't want you to think I'm like, I don't want you to feel pain for me, because as I will explain, there's a way that I managed to let all of it go. But the heavy word that I'm talking about is the word rape, right? And to me, rape is not really what the movies call it. To me, rape can be more subtle. It can be more um, like, you don't necessarily, like for instance, saying, "Oh, it's my birthday and I really want you to do this for me," and I'm just like 16 years old with a 21-year-old boyfriend, and he's just like, "But it's my birthday and it would really make me happy," and of course I'm just like, okay, I never had agency over my body anyways, so I don't even know what choice even means. And plus, I'm just think that I'm here to please everyone, so let me make you happy, right? So even though on the outside that might look consensual, underneath there's, what my elders told me is, rape is when you have to, not when you want to. That's their litmus test. Did you want to, or did you feel like you had to, or did you actually physically have to because someone was basically forcing you? And so that also is related to the alcohol induced or drug induced sexual things that happen, because when you're alcohol or drug induced, you can't really choose, right? You don't, there's no one there to choose. And so what I did was I would choose these things when I was drunk or whatever, on whatever drug, um, and I wasn't, that's still a have to, because there's no one even there to give consent. Uh, and so a lot of that happened. And what's important about this phenomenon of rape is that it's like a trick. It really tricks people into thinking they lost their worth and they lost their sacredness and they lost their virtue. Because if something happens, like I was saying, when I was 16, it's an older guy, and it was very unromantic. I was expecting my first time to be very like sacred and kind, and it was just very, very painful and not nice. And so after that, because I didn't run away, or because I didn't say no, or because I didn't um, just do a karate chop and get out of there, I felt like I had chosen it, right? But what my elders taught me later on, and because I chose it, I felt like it made me bad too, that all of that bad stuff that happened to my body made that I was complicit with it, that I cooperated with it, and therefore I had lost my virtue, or so I thought. And so what the elders told me is that sometimes there's three responses to danger. There's fight and flight, right? We know about those ones where you either fight or you flight and you run away. But there's also freeze. And freeze is the one that oftentimes makes us think we cooperated with an unwanted sexual encounter, because sometimes it's so shocking to us that someone would even advance, that we're just freeze. Especially if, like me, as a child, you were trained to freeze, right? You don't have choice. You just do what you're told. Um, and so um, that's what I did, was I froze, and I would freeze a lot, and I would just try and close my eyes and wait till it was over, and try to just not be awkward about it. And so, but the problem is, you take on your shoulders the ickiness of those experiences of like, oh, like I therefore have to get that. I have to, and that's where the self-blame came for me, and the self-shame of like, I started to feel tainted. I started to feel ugly. I started to feel gross. I started to feel like bad, like a bad person. Um, and my entire self image started to just completely come unraveled. And so, what do? I do more drugs so I can escape that feeling of just pure self hatred, that sort of operates very quietly underneath everything. Even though I was a Stanford student, which is like the best college in the world, I just felt horrible. I felt worthless. Um, and so, as I was proceeding in my healing journey, I didn't get there yet because I kept drinking to escape that feeling of worthlessness. And of course, when I would drink, more stuff would happen, which would make me feel more worthless, which would make me want to drink more. And it was this cycle. Um, and different drugs too. Stanford's in the Bay Area, which is a big party city. So there was plenty of ways to escape. And so, as a Native woman too, or a Native man, or any Native person, or any person at the end of the day, but brown women, I think, in that context, were seen as the most disposable. And perhaps that's why we see the highest rates of sexual abuse with Native women, because we're in the artificial paradigm of colonization, the paradigm brought here by Columbus, and even the Enlightenment era, the Galileo, and all these people who view European intellectualism as the highest pinnacle of civilization. Who's on the bottom in that construct is Native people. Even though we're actually highly sophisticated and our societies were very advanced, and to this day the world owes us for most of the foods that they eat, um, still we're painted as inferior, or like the lowest bar on the ladder of racial hierarchy, which is bogus. It's actually, in my opinion, our cultures were much more advanced than this even 21st century capitalistic mechanistic culture. So anyways, brown women in Stanford were, I think, targeted much more frequently. And I could see it, I could see my friends too slowly self-destruct. And usually the pivotal point was when we first experienced some kind of rape incident. But then again, we didn't have the words to call it rape, right? Because we didn't have that have to or want to litmus test. We only had Hollywood, right? And like, it's only rape if it looks like this. But the thing is, even if it doesn't look like on Hollywood, it still has the same effect on your self-esteem. And so when I was 20 years old, I was a sophomore in college. And that was a really big year for me, because all of my trauma, childhood stuff, sexual abuse stuff, um, racial inferiority complex, was kind of just building up to the point where it just broke me. So I was doing really hard drugs. Oops, sorry. I was doing really hard drugs all the time, drinking nearly every day, still passing my classes somehow, don't ask me how. And I studied abroad in Chile, in Santiago de Chile, in South America. So I was studying abroad, and I was working with the Mapuche, the indigenous folks of Chile. And it was quite beautiful in some ways, but I was still in my escapist, drug addict life. And right when I was there, an 8.8 magnitude earthquake struck on February 27th, 2010 at 3:40 a.m. And 3:40 a.m., you're sleeping. 8.8, it was the largest Um, Japan outdid them later on, but at that point, one of the largest earthquakes, or the largest earthquake ever recorded, it tilted the Earth's axis just a little bit. It was huge. And it lasted a minute and a half. And I woke up and I tried to get my host family to get up, and they wouldn't. And I was like, all right, well, every woman for herself. And I ran to the balcony, and I saw the street was just shaking, and the car alarms were all bursting, and or car alarms were all going off, and the street lights were bursting. And I looked up at the 12-story apartment building I was in, and it was just swaying, and I was pretty sure I was going to die. Um, and interestingly, I had been praying for death, because like I said, the abuse and the trauma had gotten so overwhelming that I just didn't want to be here. I didn't really know why, but I felt like it would just be easier if I would go back home to Creator. So I would ask Creator, I'd say, can you take me back? Um, and so, funnily enough, I'm standing toe to toe with death all of a sudden, and I jumped off the balcony because I thought the building was going to collapse. And to my surprise, the building did not collapse, but I did, and I broke my hip and I broke my spine. And that was the beginning of a serious transformation in my life, because that's when I really ramped up on the drugs and the alcohol, because my whole life had just got ruined in front of my eyes. My honors thesis research I was working on, I couldn't walk for 2.5 months. I just had to sit there. Um, and so I was just very depressed. I drank a lot and did a lot of drugs. And then I realized I had to go home to my mom's house in New Mexico. So I did. And she told me, to pray. And luckily we had our ceremonies. And in this case, this was actually Lakota ceremonies, because I hadn't really reclaimed my Dene identity at that time. That came later on, because my grandparents went to the boarding schools and were heavily Christianized and Americanized, and were Christian patriots, of the United States. And so they didn't teach me my culture, right? So, but my mom did have this Lakota way that we were praying in, the sweat lodge, Sundance. And I often say, if it wasn't for the Lakota, I don't think I would be here. If it wasn't for those ceremonies, I don't think I would be here. Because when she put me out on a fasting ceremony on the hill, and you just sit on the hill for a few days, that's where I finally had the quietude and um, the the space and the sobriety, because I couldn't drink. I was in nature for a few days, so I couldn't, and I knew it was wrong to do that, so I would never do that during ceremony. And so I was sober for long enough, just 3 days, to realize that I needed to get sober. And so that's where the story really gets interesting, is that when I finally made that prayer to Creator, to saying, hey, I'm ready. This is the first time in my life I actually want to get sober. I was 20 years old. I'd been doing drugs for 9 years. And I said, I'm ready, and I came off the hill, and I was right back at the bottle just a few days later. And I just felt enslaved to these chemicals. But sure enough, a few months later, I met some mentors who basically saved my butt. And what they taught me was that addiction was not really my problem. Addiction was a symptom of a deeper problem, which was rape. And they helped me find the words and the language to understand that what happened to me was rape in a spiritual sense. Spiritually, that's what happened, and it had those spiritual repercussions on my life of self-hatred and self-destruction. And explain we are in a battle. We are in a battle, and the battle is between what is close to Creator and what is far. And because Native people are very close to Creator, First Nations people, our cultures are still intact, whereas the European cultures had been destroyed by the Romans a long time ago, and their way of connecting to Creator was destroyed in a lot of places. So there's a reason they said that Native people are targeted in this war, is because the spiritual forces that want to see everyone disconnected from Creator, they're going to target those cultures who still have that flow going of prayer. And so who is that? That's the First Nations people. That's not just us, but different communities who are connected to that prayer. And so, obviously they're going to target us and they're going to target me. And so they helped me see that I was actually part of a larger battle. And another thing they told me was that rape isn't as powerful as the trickster wants you to think, because in my culture, it's ma'i, the coyote, or in the Lakota culture, it's ikitome, the spider, or, in Christian culture, they call it Lucifer. But, to us, it's not this big, mighty, evil power. It's just a coyote that is, and you just pray for him and you learn his tricks and it's all good. So what they told me was rape is one of those tricks because it tricks you into thinking that you've lost something. So like for me, they said, they may have touched your body, but they can never touch your spirit. And they said, you are not your body, you are your spirit. They said, therefore, they never touched you. They never even touched you. And therefore, they never changed you. So no one can take that from a woman or from a man. She has to give her spirit, and he has to give his spirit in those times of ceremonial connection between them, between the two. You, by definition, cannot take it. Therefore, they didn't take anything from you because you never gave it. And they said, you're unscathed, you're unchanged, you're unfazed. And, therefore, there's really nothing to heal. Which was kind of crazy for me to think about because I felt uh, like it had corroded me, like it had corrupted me, like it had just really messed me up. And not to say rape is harmless or that it's okay. It's not okay. And so it's very brutal and it's very disrespectful. But what they said is that the way to heal, the final step of healing is forgiveness. So what I had to do, and what I'm still in the process of doing, is going through each memory of my life, each experience, each time when I experienced that, and I'm looking at it for what it was, not blaming the self, because we blame ourselves because we don't want to hate them. We'd rather tell ourselves, oh, I'm just so stupid, I shouldn't have drank that night, or I'm so stupid, I should have said no, or I'm so stupid, I should have said no louder, or I should have known better. We always find these creative ways to blame ourselves for these uncomfortable experiences. And they said, don't blame yourself, understand who did it, and understand that sometimes they really know what they're doing. They have full understanding. And that's the ones that really hurt, where you're like, that's just mean. But they said, then you forgive. And that one was hard for me, like, how do you forgive that? And they said, forgiveness means not holding it against them. We could cash in our right to retribution, our right to revenge, our right to amends, our right to maybe even, getting financial you know, as as veterans of rape, my mentors don't call it victims. They say you're a veteran because you went through a war and you're still here. You're not a victim. But anyways, as veterans, we are owed something, you know, in a way. We deserve and we have a right to um, reparations. And they said forgiveness is literally letting go of that right, which sounds crazy, um, and maybe it is. But what it's about is it's about loving someone unconditionally, even people who hurt us. And they said the reason that's the final stage of healing is because it releases within you the last wound that they gave you, which is the wound of bitterness and anger. So once you give that up, you say, I don't want that anymore, then they have nothing on you anymore. They have no, then you're truly unscathed. Then you're truly unchanged. Then you truly have no um, residual effects of that experience. And so um, that really helped me a lot. Uh, and I'm still, like I said, there's, there's forgiveness is still hard sometimes, especially now with what's going on in America and white supremacy and things like that. It's really hard to forgive, but I think that's what we're being asked to do and we're being called to do. Um, and our ancestors did it before, right? They've showed us how to do it. Um, you know, Nelson Mandela is a good example why his story just like shook the world, right? Because he released his right to revenge, and he just said, I don't want it. And that is kind of what the ancestors did for me, you know, in a way, because when they found me when I was 20 years old, just a complete mess and a drug addict and just basically a menace to society. I had a shoplifting problem. I had all kinds of problems. Um, any normal person would have said, hey, you know what? You are a misfit and you've actually broken the law and you need to go to jail. You know, like that's what society would have done to me. But what the ancestors did to me was they said, you know what? We actually see something in you. We see something beautiful in you. And we see, and we want to say that we're sorry. You know, we're sorry that your childhood was trained you to do these things. We're sorry that you were hurt from a young age. We're sorry that you never knew um, how to find safety, that you didn't even know really what that meant, you know? And and they absolved me of all of those crimes I had committed, all those things that society had a right to revenge for me. And they just said, you know, we actually see you as a medicine woman. And I was like, are you sure? Like, I don't think I I don't think that's me. I think you got the wrong girl. And they said, no, you know, we see you as a medicine person. And and they get, not only did they give me a second chance at life because I did quit alcohol and drugs and cigarettes and everything. I quit on December 15th of 2012. So I'm almost 8 years sober, you know, so that they gave me a second chance, but they also, not only that, but they asked me to be a leader, which still boggles my mind. They asked me to be a warrior, and they asked me to be a supporter of what they were trying to do, of healing the world. And so not only did they give me a second chance, but they even wanted me to fight with them in this army of passion and fierce um, dedication to healing our people and our Mother Earth. And so that was pretty wild, to finally break free from the chemicals and to finally understand that I am not only not bad, but I'm actually very good. And so I feel like we do that when we forgive others too. Um, we try to have deep insight, deep understanding into their situation and forgiveness. Like for instance, this goes from a personal level out to a collective level, where the European nations that slaughtered our people, that slaughtered our beavers, slaughtered the world, life itself, pretty much, and are still slaughtering. But when you look deeper, you look at the Roman expansion, you look at the Inquisition in Europe where people were, tortured. You look at the persecution of millions of women in Europe as witches, some of whom were burned alive, drowned alive, tortured in torture chambers. Um, you look at King Edward I, um, massacring 100 Celtic harpists in the 1200s. You look at the prohibition of the Welsh language in schools, or they would tie a block of wood around your neck that said WN, which stood for Welsh not, and the only way you could get it off your neck is if you caught another kid speaking Welsh. All of these tactics that, or you look at Constantine in the year 300 AD, conquering European indigenous villages in the name of Christ, when all of a sudden the Roman Empire became Christian, and how they actually co-opted and culturally appropriated Jesus for their own empire. And that was 1100 years before Columbus ever washed up. So they had been practicing this method of torture and conquest and empire on European peoples way before that tactic was exported over here. So then you start to see the cycles of violence. And so that's how forgiving, your abuser goes from a microcosmic level to a macrocosmic level of how do we forgive entire cultures? How do we forgive entire histories? And how do we look deeper at what really happened to people? And how do we heal trauma, on every level? And so I find that forgiveness is like it's like a bomb almost that goes off and shakes the world. And people, their souls almost tremble because it's so beautiful when you basically give someone this big gift of absolving their debts and just say, you know what, I don't care anymore. I'm not saying that was okay. I'm not saying that was good. I'm not saying I'm not going to fight the rest of my life to make sure that doesn't happen again. But I'm just saying I don't care about this specific bone to pick anymore. And I want you to feel love, and I want you to feel grace and forgiveness. So that was a big part of my healing process, was forgiveness. And I think I covered most of the things I want to cover. But suffice it to say that my prayer was answered. I am sober now. And then some. I have a lot to be grateful for right now. I know what a safe space is, right? Because once you go through all those memories of all those people that hurt you, oh yeah, that's probably my say first. Um, why why do people who were abused as children turn around and abuse their own children? This is a very, very important question, because this is the crux of intergenerational trauma. And what I understand is that, from what I understand, when we are children and we're being abused, take for example one of my elders. She said when she was a kid at the boarding school, they'd have to write 100 times, I will only speak English, I will only speak English, I will only speak English. If they got caught speaking Navajo, they'd have to do that. And they also beat the crap out of them. She says she remembers the matron, bringing the kid in front of the whole class and just raising her hand and just smacking him across the face for throwing sand at another student. They just beat them all the time. Then this elder grows up, right? And what does she do? She beats her son really brutally. And so how does that happen? And from what I understand is, when she was a little girl, and not only was the dorm and the boarding school beating her, but her own parents were beating her, and so on, she is essentially forced to turn that into love, right? Because imagine being 5 years old, everyone's getting beat up. How do you survive the next 13 years when you turn 18 and you finally get to go away? I don't know about you, but when I was 5, 18 years old felt like might have been 2,000 years away. So you're kind of trapped in this situation. And so one way to survive it is to make these creative stories in your head. And my elder tells me, oh, they used to beat us because they wanted us to be disciplined. They loved us. That's how they loved us. So that's one of those creative stories, like, oh, they loved me. And that story is what helps us survive. And we need that story. But then the problem is, when we finally get out of that place, we turn 18 and we go away, we still carry that story with us, right? And that story shielded us from a lot of pain. And in order to expose that as a lie, you also have to feel all that pain, Imagine someone telling this elder, actually, they didn't love you. They actually just beat you because they were older and they took advantage of you being a kid and you being brown and they were white, and, all of that. Imagine this elder having to realize that they were wrong this whole time, and that story isn't actually true. I've experienced that a couple different times where, like, I realized this person I thought loved me my whole life was actually abusive to me. I was like, oh my God, it's hard. It's a really challenging, especially when those people who love you are still your only friends and your only family. Because if you admit that they're abusive, then who do you have left? What do you have left? So the only way I could see the people I thought loved me were actually abusing me was when I had another support system in the form of these mentors to hold me. Once I realized they had my back, I could let go of that old one. So that's what we can do for each other, is we can give each other new support systems so that our mind and our brain finally has a safety net to let go of the old one that was harming us. And so that's how these, to my understanding, I think child sexual abuse is almost always done by someone who was abused as a child, because that's where you learn that stuff, and that's where you have to turn it into love, make it into a good thing to survive it. And then, but then the problem, if you don't let go of that pretty story that you told yourself to survive it, then therefore it's okay to do to others. And so sometimes we perpetuate these cycles, and it's very sad, because not only do we have to realize we've been abused, but then we have to realize we've abused others. And sometimes that's even harder to, even though we didn't understand it and it wasn't our fault. We didn't witness, you know, and I've experienced that too. I have perpetuated abuse that happened to me, and it hurts, like I said, worse than the other. So anyways, I think that's important to understand, because to me, the healing process is one of taking away those pretty stories, and it's not fun. It feels like your whole world just shifts, because this one belief you had your whole life growing up, you realize wasn't actually true. And it has all these cascading effects, because you had other beliefs that were founded on that initial false belief. So you kind of lose a whole domino effect of friends, family, belief systems. I mean, it's hard, but the reason it's worth it is because when you get to the other side of that process, you know what abuse is and you know what love is. So you don't put yourself in those abusive situations thinking that it's normal or love. So that's a very big one, is safety comes with the process. Once I did that process, I finally understood what was safe and what wasn't. And secondly, you get to share this with others. You know, I couldn't share any of this if I didn't decide to get sober one day. I couldn't share any of this if I didn't have the courage to look at how the people, my caretakers that I thought loved me and took care of me, really weren't actually there for me, you know. So that's the biggest reward, I think, of going through these processes, is actually having tools by the end of it that you can use to help others. That's the best part of all of it, is that you come out, you know, of those wounds as a healer, that can share that understanding with others. Um, and that's the type of warriors I think our Native communities need right now, very badly. So I'll stop there. And I know that was a very heavy lecture or talk or whatever it was, but I am open to anything y'all would like to say or write if you want to.
Lyla, if I may first, thank you so much. You are amazing. I just wanted to mention to people before we go into questions too, as Lyla said, these are really heavy topics, and I mean, your vulnerability and, you know, transparency and sharing them is amazing, but we all are probably familiar with the idea of being triggered and having our own traumas reactivated by someone sharing in this way. So if you are listening and you're feeling anything intense, I mean, Three Corners is still open. It's 398-9814. Just give them a call. And if you need any support, reach out, okay? But please, anyone who wants to ask any questions of Lyla, let's go for it. If you, as she said, in the chat, or if you want to just unmute yourself and ask directly too. I did receive too, Lyla, a message from someone listening, just that it felt very meaningful for them to listen to you talk about your experiences with rape, and to hear it echoed through your personal history. So yeah, and we are still recording. If anyone wants to ask a question anonymously too, you're certainly welcome to send me a private message and I can relay it to Lyla.
Hi, Lyla. My name's Judy, and I just wanted to thank you for your open and honest sharing. It was beautiful and touching, and I just admire your strength. I have been serving in an addiction recovery program as a group leader, facilitator for about 12 years, and I just wished I could encapsulate your story and share that with every attendee that comes, just to show what success looks like. Grateful that you walked the walk you did, and that you're a warrior who's going to turn around and reach back and help all of those in need to see that there is hope. So I'm really grateful for your story, and sorry that you had such a rough go at life, but I know it was all for this beautiful purpose that you're doing now, and I'm grateful for you for that. And I wish there was a way to escalate people to rock bottom quicker And I just wondered if you had any, where you had that amazing experience on your awakening journey on the hillside for 3 days, and then you said you turned back to alcohol right after that. I was just curious about that because I kind of thought the story would go differently. I thought maybe that would be your, you know, your awakening and not have to go back to alcohol. But what do you think got you finally to rock bottom where you were ready to make that change?
So I think, even though it doesn't seem like that was the pivotal moment because I still went right back to drinking, I think it actually was, because that was when I asked Creator for help. Um, and I think that's seriously the only thing we have to do. Um, and like I said, it was the first time in my life I actually wanted to be sober. And so what I understand is that, from what I understand, is that if we simply ask Creator, tell Creator where we want to get to, He will do the rest. He, she, it, they, the ancestors will bring us there. We just have to tell them where we're trying to get to. And we could have no idea how to get there. I didn't, I had no idea. But if we just say, hey, I want to get to sobriety, that still was the pivotal moment, because that's when the whole universe seemed to conspire to help me get there. Um, and I think everyone's going to get there differently, perhaps, but that's who Creator sent to me to help me get there. So I think it was the pivotal moment, even though the prayer hadn't uh, materialized yet. It still was basically done because I had already made the prayer. Um, and so thank you so much. And I did just see this other comment from someone, which was, how much was singing and dancing part of your journey? Well, um, I think that evolved with my healing process, because before, when I was a poet, and that's actually how I got into college, was I was a poet, and you know, kind of a well-known poet in my area, um, and I was a guitarist and a singer-songwriter, and I think that all of my songs and poems were kind of falling flat because they were all about being famous or being you know getting reputation or making money. And it wasn't until after I went through that healing process and that training process that I realized that
Driving a big truck.
that my poetry and music was actually to serve others and wasn't to make me famous. And so that's when the medicine started coming through the songs and the poetry a lot better, because it was like, okay, you're here to help people. So before I write, now I'm like, okay, may I help at least one person with this poem? May I help at least one person with this song? And that's how I would get to a place where, now I feel like my music is a lot more grounded and a lot better, to be honest. And so I think my songs, and I never really danced, actually. I mean, I would dance on the dance floor, but I'm not a dancer per se. Um, and I mean, I did powwow dance a long time ago, but I don't really remember how. So anyways, I think as you heal, your craft and your gifts heals as well. And one thing I just wanted to say real quick too was that this is very much coming from somewhat of a feminine perspective. What I was told is that, yes, men can be affected in the same way, especially if it's men abusing men sexually, which happened a lot in the Roman Empire, and they kind of brought that. But that has serious repercussions. But what really, really harms the spirit of a man and tricks him is domestic violence. Because if his mom is getting beat up or his sisters are getting beat up, he feels like he failed at his job. you know, to protect the women. And when you, even if he's a toddler, him like blame myself for all the rape, he'll blame himself and it will eat him up and it will really make life hard for him and do the same thing to him what all of these experiences did to me. So I wanted to just point that out and just share that for whatever it's worth, you know, that that's what I was told, is that, you know, that DV does a number on the young men, like in a really big, deep way. And for them to heal, they have to kind of do what I did, where they have to see that it wasn't their fault, was not their fault. And they have to understand that it was something else's fault, and take that off of their shoulders and love themselves. So that was one last thing I forgot to mention. But any other questions or comments? Yeah.
I thank you for that. My name is Pat. Thank you for mentioning that. It seems I'm maybe the only male on this Zoom call today.
Yeah.
But, I appreciate it, but I wanted to mention, like I'm the oldest of 6, and I have 5 younger sisters. So what you just said really, and you can hear some of my kids in the background, but yeah, it is true. You know, you take that responsibility on too.
I can hear you.
And I was really appreciate the message around how you can't hurt my spirit, right? You know, whatever happens, you can't hurt my spirit, right? And I really appreciated that, because it's true. And you know, I really appreciated your talk, as I do think about my sisters, and I have 5 younger sisters, so I'm constantly worried about the idea and what you talked about with the idea of European dominance, and I've had those discussions with my younger sisters. So I had those had those discussions with my sisters to be wary of that.
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, and that's this position that this system of colonization puts our Native men in, right? Like when they came to my homeland, we had already been under the thumb of the Spanish crown for 300 years before they even brought English into our homeland. But when they did come, the US Army, they put 9,000 of my people in a concentration camp. And in this camp, the women would not be allowed water unless they went to the soldiers' barracks and did what the soldiers wanted them to do. So they were systematically raped in this concentration camp. And so the men, their husbands, their sons, their brothers, their uncles, they couldn't do anything. They literally were at gunpoint. They couldn't help, they couldn't protect. And what I was told is that place, that concentration camp, was not designed to destroy our bodies. It was designed to destroy our souls. And so, you know, that's what we're healing from. And it's no wonder our communities have some issues, you know, like alcoholism, DV, diabetes, because we're not even supposed to be here. Like, we were supposed to be exterminated. And not only that, but they tortured us. And so, yeah, we're gonna have some issues, you know, and And I'm so proud of us for stepping forward and I think that our job is to, again, not blame ourselves, take that blame off, you know, because those men in that camp blamed themselves. Like, oh, I should have, if I was stronger or smarter or whatever, I could have stopped the soldier from doing that to my wife or my daughter or whatever. But it wasn't their fault, you know, and that's what they have to understand. Um, and that's what a lot of our men are still healing from, which again is heavy, super heavy. And yet, until we process this heavy, and release the blame and then forgive, right? We're not going to be free within ourselves and able to resist those temptations to escape through various means, because now there's nothing to escape from. There's nothing, there's no pain there to run away from, because we've processed it, we faced it, we felt it, we let it go, and we forgave it. And that goes all the way down the line. That's not just Native people that got to do that. European people got to do that. I don't know if you guys know this, but when the British Crown went into the Scottish villages, they would kill the bards first, the ones who held the stories and the songs and the culture. And when they killed them, they would bury them face down so that their stories would die with them. You know, that's what European folks are carrying, and we don't even know it. You know, I'm part Scottish, and I didn't even know I was carrying that was part of my lineage. And so that stuff, we all got to do this stuff to come back to joy. I know it's really heavy and sorrowful, but the thing at the end of the road is joy, and that is why we're here to feel joy. But sometimes you have to face that nagging, dull inner pain to get to that space of joy. Okay, I'm rambling too much, but is it maybe one more question?
I think Susie had a question. If you want to go ahead, Susie.
I would like to thank Three Corners for having you today, and Chief Harry as a male, Indigenous male, for being present, Noella for helping your victims to be survivors from rape, because this is such a heavy topic that no one wants to talk about it. It's another secret that it's too difficult. So I raise my hands up to you and everyone else here who is listening.
Thank you so
So
much.
thank
Susie.
you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I'm honored to find a space to bring it up in a gentle way. And it is possible to do that. And so, yeah, I think unless there's any more questions, you know, maybe burning questions, I think I will go ahead and hand it to you, CL.
Thanks, Lyla.
I had a question.
Yeah, sure.
Maybe you have any advice for for a father like me that's feeling the pressure of raising a young First Nations daughter and wants the best and wants her to be safe at all times and everything, and just maybe struggle with you know, how to have those talks. You know, she's only 5 right now, but she's gonna be she's already a handful. But you know, you know, as an Indigenous residential school survivor myself, and you know, I was really touched by a lot of the conversation today. You know, it's something that we weren't taught. You know, my mother was a survivor, my father is a survivor, and a lot of those skills weren't taught to me and my sisters. And you know, that's to no fault of my parents, but it is one of my biggest challenges is raising kids and wanting different for them and I assume that they'll have theirs too, but I want all of us. I don't think we want our kids to have to go through some of the things that we went through, probably. And as we progress, I think we're probably in a better position now than ever to make sure that that doesn't happen again. But I just feel those pressures of being a father raising a daughter sometimes, and wanting to do it in a good way. Cooks Joe.
Yeah, well, I am not a parent yet, so I can't speak to that, but I have been a child. And I think there's a lot more that I don't know about this question. But one thing I do know is that, sorry, my dog sees someone out the window, that touch is really important, because say you're going to asking for permission first is really, it teaches them that that's normal. Like, for instance, say there's something in her hair, like a fuzz or something. One way you could teach her is say, may I take that out of your hair? And then wait for her to say, oh yeah, go ahead. Boom. That teaches her consent, right? That people should always ask, and then you should always have a choice. That way, when she grows up, if something doesn't match that, she knows that it's not right. Whereas for me, I didn't have that. It was just touch all the time, whatever, get over here, come here, So I never, when I was older and that was happening to me in the parties and stuff, I didn't push it away, because I was like, oh, this is normal. It's just what people do. So I think that's one way that you could teach consent early on, is say, hey, and sometimes it's not always practical, because like a car is coming and you just need to grab their hand and pull them out of the road. But if there's any opportunities to teach them, like, hey, may I, yeah, I don't know, you know what I'm saying? I put my arm around you, and they say, yeah, there's little ways you could teach them that what happens to them, their body matters, and they should always choose when and where and how they are touched. That's one little tidbit I could offer.
Thank you.
And one thing they told me was, you cannot, what did they say? Like, you cannot protect your children, but you can give them the tools to protect themselves. Something like that, of like, because I have a feeling I'm going to be the same way when I be a parent. I'm going to be very overprotective, and I think what they're trying to teach me is like, you can't always protect them from everything, but just like through that exercise, you can give them the tools to then protect themselves. And at the end of the day, it's up to them, that they're going to live their own life, and it might not be perfect, and that's their journey.
Thank you, Lyla. I think Tanya has her hand up. Tanya, if you want to unmute yourself, if you want to have one last question, we'll make this our last question for Lyla.
Hi, yeah, I was just going to add to what you guys were just talking about. I'm a mom of a very strong-willed 4-year-old girl, and I think one thing that has been really helping is just building self-esteem and independence, so that, no matter what, she always feels strong and in control, and like she knows what she's doing. So just like that consciousness is always there. So I think that probably helps. But also when it comes to boys, because I have 2 boys as well, you want to treat them all the same, because all of the things that could happen to girls can happen to boys too. You just want to make sure that they have that consent and that self-esteem and control of themselves at all times. I think it's all important. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Tanya. So, yeah, thank you, Lyla. You are such a gift, and we've been so lucky to have a conversation with you and have you here today. Again, everyone listening, really take care of yourselves tonight. These are all really heavy topics and intense conversation and so meaningful. And hopefully, Lyla, at some point when the borders open, maybe we'll be able to meet you in person and bring you up, because I think your message has been very well received today. So thank you.
Yeah, I'd be honored to meet all of you in any way at any time. So yeah, thank you all so much. Have a beautiful evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.